Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to Live Before Lock Christmas NFL edition. We got a wild one here with the Saints, who are down a lot of guys, and we got the perfect guy here to help us, Matt Gajewski, who, of course, has been doing all the college football and basketball projections. Matt, how you doing, man?
Alex, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. This is our first legit stream we've ever done together. We did the Xmas special yesterday, but otherwise, Alex and I have never done a stream together. So this is a real treat for me on the holiday.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, man. I heard you got a big Christmas gift if you want to share it, but man, that Xmas stream yesterday we did, like, it always feels good to wake up and at 10 in the morning crack open some whiskey. So how do you fare after that?
I took a midday nap. The Christmas stream was really fun. You and I were talking before show. It's not often we get to just talk, not about sports, like our lives, and catch up as, like human beings. So that was really fun. For Christmas, the best gift I received, I get a package from my parents, of course, these COVID times. So I don't know what's in this. And I go to lift it up, and it's about 10 times heavier than I expect. Like, what in the world is in this? I open it up, and it's probably like 75 cans of tuna. So best Christmas gift I could have ever received. I have breakfast for about 2 months now.
Dude, that is epic. So hopefully you guys all out there are getting Christmas gifts that rival 75 pounds of tuna. I haven't unwrapped mine yet, so I can't really speak to it, but that's definitely going to make it onto my wish list for next year. Let's talk a little bit about Monday night, one of the craziest NFL games of the year. Steelers, they were undefeated late into the season, but then they're going up against Ryan Finley and the Bengals, so they lost the game. And man, like, the most contrarian builds took it all down. What did we learn from that?
I think, these NFL games, as much as like we want to ride game script or projected game script, sometimes they don't go according to plan. And we've seen this numerous times this year. As far as the Monday night game, Lofty and I doing the strategy show, I don't think we've ever been more incorrect in our takes. And for those of you that are bold enough to take those contrarian approaches and, captain guys like Giovanni Bernard, they definitely reap the rewards on Monday. And that's certainly in play on single game showdown slates.
Definitely. Yeah. Gio Bernard, he was coming off a real rough game where he saw his workload decrease a lot. And it just shows that it's hard to go off 1 week's info and really know what's going to happen the next week. And we have a situation today where I feel like it could be hard to predict as well, with the New Orleans wideouts. So to set the table for everyone, Traquan Smith got sent to the IR earlier this week. Michael Thomas also on the IR. They released Tommy Lee Lewis not too long ago. And I can't remember if there's any other injuries, because they're down to Emmanuel Sanders as their wide receiver one. And after that, it's some dude that barely played in the start of the year, Juwon Johnson. And then they have Marquez Callaway coming off the IR. So, like, man, what are you making of these wideouts in New Orleans?
Yeah, I don't know how long Deontay Harris has been on injury reserve, but he's mainly a special teams guy for them, but just another player that they can't even trot out there. As far as the wide receivers that we have currently, I think we know Emmanuel Sanders is going to function as that primary pass catcher. And then behind him, someone that I really have my eye on is Marquez Callaway, who you mentioned was activated off injured reserve. He had a 2-game stretch earlier in the year. Of course, Michael Thomas was hurt for both of these games, and Sanders was out for one of them. But in back-to-back games, he had 6 and 10 targets, already operating ahead of guys like Juwon Johnson and little Jordan Humphrey, who we'll get to. But just the fact that he's already beaten out those guys, I'm really interested in him at the stone minimum.
Yeah, I think Holloway is a really interesting play, and this is one where, like, we don't have a lot of priors, but he was ahead of these other guys in the depth chart to start the year. The other inactives today that are of note, we have CJ Ham out for Minnesota. He's the fullback that catches passes. And then Alexander Madison is out. That means Mike Boone is going to be the backup to Dalvin Cook. So besides that, I think pretty set as far as injuries. We got all the studs like Kamara and Cook healthy. Before we get into the deep dive here, I want to mention we still have this promo code Caruso, $1 NBA weekly pass. It's good until the 29th of December. So if you haven't tried out our NBA DFS package, or maybe you have and you liked it, it's only $1 for the next week. So use that promo code Caruso. Also, it's Christmas. We need a little bit of love. Hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's talk about Minnesota. So the Vikings had this huge game versus Chicago last week, where to make it to the postseason, they basically had to run the table or close to it. But Chicago, being their division rival, that was a bad loss. Dalvin Cook had been going out like pretty much every single snap. Now the Vikings playoff odds are down to about 2%, so there is a chance. But I'm like kind of nervous that we could start to see maybe some changes in Minnesota's strategy, but I'm not really sure. So what's your take on Minnesota's situation here?
I think they're still going to try to go for it at this point, but like you mentioned, the chances are really slim. If they wanted to start spelling Dalvin Cook a little bit, I think it's a good time to do so because he's been banged up throughout the year, and it hasn't really been enough to keep him out of games, but we routinely see him come off the field with these injury scares. And at some point with Dalvin Cook, I mean, the Vikings in that 2% playoff chance, you'd think they would want to spell him a little bit. But at this point, they're still probably holding on to that 2% chance. And I think we'll likely see another voluminous approach from the Vikings just riding Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, I have to agree. 2% is not insignificant. So I think they're still motivated enough to keep playing. Now, New Orleans defense is pretty tough, and Minnesota is a big underdog in this game. So, I mean, Dalvin Cook is probably the number one fantasy player this year, close to it. How do you feel about him in this matchup?
I think he's fine in the matchup. I like Dalvin Cook either way because he's obviously an extension of the pass game. And I don't think at least at this point in the season, his targets haven't been too different from Kamara's. A lot of that probably has to do with Taysom Hill playing that stretch of games. But Dalvin Cook's still very active as a pass catcher, and he's been north of 22 raw touches in each of the last 4 games, and north of 24 in 3 of those. So I think just as far as raw touch projection goes, Dalvin Cook still far and away leads the slate.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, when you have Kamara kind of splitting with Latavius Murray, Dalvin Cook is head and shoulders above as far as the number of touches. Is kind of a man. Like, uh, so I'm bringing up the odds here because I don't have them in front of me, but I think New Orleans is like a touchdown favorite. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Vegas isn't loving Minnesota. I think it is in a large part due to their defense not being very good, but I do agree. Like, man, Dalvin Cook, if this game doesn't go according to the Vegas game script, like, he has immense upside. So he's going to be someone that we want to keep in mind for our captain and MVP. The other element is usually Minnesota is a very run-first team. I actually have this advanced stats page on Awesemo now where I kind of dig through the data and find the rushing percent of each team. Minnesota's base rate is the 4th highest in the league at 50% in neutral game scripts. However, I mean, this game script is setting up to go badly for them as such underdogs. they've been very effective in their passing attack, particularly to Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. So, do you feel more encouraged about maybe more passing volume in a tough matchup versus New Orleans?
Yeah, I do because of the projected game script. Of course, building these lineups, we need to consider game script, of course, and the Cincinnati game is a prime example of how things can go wrong. And in this particular game, we are projecting Minnesota to be down by a pretty significant amount. That should lead to more opportunities for Jefferson and Thielen. And one thing I really, really like about these two is the condensed share between them. Minnesota is a team that doesn't often run 11 personnel, and you might think that benefits the run at first, but it also benefits the receivers a little bit because when fullbacks like CJ Ham and two tight ends like Irv Smith and Tyler Conklin are on the field, it just reduces the overall available targets for the other players. So Thielen and Jefferson have a large share of the offense. They're both north of 25% of the targets this year.
Yeah, I mean, two guys getting 25% plus, and then Dalvin Cook, you maybe factor in for another like 10 to 15%. So like, there's really scraps for the other guys, but maybe a little bit better for some of them because Kyle Rudolph continues to be out. So with Rudolph out, Irv Smith, he's been playing maybe a few more routes a game, but then Tyler Conklin has been the big playing time beneficiary. However, I mean, Conklin hasn't been getting targeted very much. So what have you noticed with Rudolph out and how that should affect our approach for DFS?
Yeah, like you mentioned with Irv Smith, his role hasn't changed a ton, just a few more snaps, a few more routes. He hasn't seen more than 4 targets in any of his last 4 active games. Tyler Conklin has seen a huge bump in playing time, and it just hasn't been blocking either. Earlier in the season, he was mainly just on the field as that third tight end in pure run blocking situations, but he actually played on 45 of 68 snaps, and he ran a route on 29 dropbacks last week, which was really surprising to me to see Tyler Conklin that active as a pass catcher. I personally thought more would go to Chad Beebe, but that just wasn't the case.
Yeah, definitely. I was surprised by Conklin's numbers as well. Um, and he definitely seems like somebody that could be a deep sleeper if you're playing in one of these super large field tournaments. So Tyler Conklin is a guy to keep on the radar. To put the numbers out there, last week he ran routes on 67% of dropbacks. That's pretty much what Rudolph's rate was. The only downside, he's only been targeted on 8% of his routes this year, which is uh, lower than pretty much. It's like if there was a Mendoza line in football, it'd be below that. So it's kind of like interesting. Maybe maybe his baseline rate should be higher than 8%. So I mean, to be in the normal bounds of NFL targets, in which case maybe he's a good sleeper. Chad Beebe is their wide receiver 3. He's only been out there like a little bit less than half the time uh, for the I was gonna say the Timberwolves, man. I've already like switched sports here, but for the Vikings. So are you gonna take any shots on BB?
I think BB's worthwhile, especially in these large field tournaments. I think the case with BB and Conklin, I think the higher owned player will be someone like Callaway just going all the way down, and we might be able to get a little break in ownership with guys like Conklin and BB who aren't exactly the stone minimum. They're about one tier above that or so. In BB in particular, I think people will be very concerned with his playing time overall, even though when he's on the field, he's essentially purely running routes. So he played 20 snaps last week, 17 routes. When he's on the field, his job is to run routes. It's like pure passing down situation. So I wouldn't make as much of just the raw snaps as maybe some other players. Like he's not run blocking at all.
Yeah, that's true. So he is kind of someone that's only out there to catch balls. He's been targeted 13% of the time when he's out there. BC Johnson has barely played except for one week where Thielen's out. So their options, your options at receiver, if you want to build like a Viking stack, are somewhat limited. So the main debate I'd say with the Vikings I've been seeing on Twitter is people really are having this debate over whether Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen is a better play, I guess. And the logic is somewhat like Justin Jefferson has been getting all the air yards and he's had a lot of efficiency. However, Adam Thielen has been getting the easier targets. but he just hasn't like converted them at a very high rate. Both of them have about a 66% catch rate this year. So, I mean, I'm kind of leaning to just the raw yardage from this year, where Justin Jefferson has been better, with them getting about the same number of targets when they're on the field. What are your thoughts on Thielen versus Jefferson?
I like Jefferson too, just the way he's used. A little more conducive to big games if you're playing tournaments. And then the raw target volume has been better than Thielen's. It's not significant. He's out targeted him in each of the last 4 games. And we have to remember, Justin Jefferson didn't really play the first 2 weeks of the season. So both of these guys are north of a 25% target share. Adam Thielen being slightly ahead of Jefferson, but Jefferson essentially didn't play 2 games. And I know Thielen missed a game himself. All this is breaking down to Justin Jefferson's been targeted a little bit more. He's being used a little bit more downfield, and that's the edge for me. And then when I take a look at our ownership, the difference between them, it does favor Jefferson, but it's really slight. Justin Jefferson just slightly more owned than Adam Thielen. So I think I'm willing to eat that extra ownership in this situation.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So when I'm looking at their average stats on DraftKings, I think that point that you made about how Jefferson didn't play as much at the start of the season is something to consider, because BC Johnson was technically their wide receiver too at the start of the year. Overall, Jefferson has averaged 18.2 fantasy points per game with DK scoring. Thielen's averaged 17.7. But Thielen has gotten a lot of his points on touchdowns relative to Jefferson. And I know one of the things that Adam Should My Money always is saying on the shows is that they use Thielen kind of like as their goal line receiver. I'm a little more skeptical about like touchdowns and just being able to predict which guy is going to get them, especially with receivers. What are your general thoughts on like how you're going to evaluate a guy with 7 touchdowns like Jefferson versus one with 13 touchdowns like Thielen, and the predictiveness of that?
I'm 100% with you. I don't think that's the stickiest stat to look at on a week to week basis. And we've seen red zone targets flip, not only just like between these games, but it happens all over the league. I know Thielen does have better red zone usage, but I wouldn't be surprised if this flips one game or another towards Jefferson. So it's not something I'll use it to break ties, but in the situation, I'm not considering it a ton.
Yeah, same. One of the things I feel like touchdowns are scored from all across the field. So like in my experience, like pretty much yards correlates with the touchdown probability pretty well. One guy that we haven't really hyped up yet is Irv Smith. Obviously more of a budget guy, and Rudolph is out. It's questionable how much impact that has on him because he's already out there like most of the snaps. Do you think that it has any effect on Irv Smith's production?
I would just give him maybe a slight increase. And like you mentioned earlier, Smith has played slightly more, a few more raw snaps, a few more raw routes, but it hasn't really led to a lot more targets. Again, just 4 targets or less in each of his last 4 games that he's been active. So if Minnesota does get into a negative game script situation, we could see this rise, but I still question the ceiling for Irv Smith. At 7,800 on DraftKings in the captain slot, that's probably not something I look to, but if you want to flex a guy like Irv, I have no problem with that.
Nice. Yeah, I think he's a good like flyer, especially if you are building a Minnesota stack. So obviously the Minnesota stack is going to hit a lot less than the New Orleans stack, but we saw Monday, and even like a huge, like a way bigger disparity between the teams. It does happen. The final thing with Minnesota, I mean, defense and kicker. Since we haven't had you on live before lock, I'd be interested to just hear how you handle defense and kicker in Showdown.
With kickers, especially if the game total's a little bit higher, I try to depress them. I just think with more touchdowns, more raw points, more expected yardage and offensive production, I think it's less likely that the kicker enters the optimal lineup. So in lower scoring situations is when I will try to get a little bit more kicker. Defense, I just kind of take it when I get it. I don't force it. I don't actively remove it. So defense just as variant as it is. I kind of just let what happens when I'm running my crunches.
Nice. Yeah, I think like yeah, obviously if there's more touchdowns, the kickers are gonna not perform well relative to the field. I actually kind of like playing for the unders to hit in some of my lineups. So one of my favorite strategies is I'll stack up like 5 players from one team, including the defense and kicker, just because it's so hard for like a ton of position players to get there. And then maybe leave some money on the table with that in the largest field, like millie makers or whatever. But I kind of like, I feel like kicker and defense is like the least sexy position, and I'm trying to like capitalize on that. So maybe I'm just kind of like a little biased in favor of it because I'm trying to be contrarian.
No, I like that. And you talked about playing towards the under, and that certainly suits that. And I don't think a lot of people play towards the under.
Especially if people are optimizing in Fantasy Cruncher, like for total points. If you just do that without any like adjustments, it's going to favor the guys that are going to perform well in high scoring games. So today we are sponsored by No House Advantage. It's like DFS, except you bet on props instead of players. A lot of fun. So you can get $20 free on No House Advantage with the promo code Awesemo. Definitely don't mind the extra Andrew Jackson in my bankroll. And we do have some props on No House Advantage on the projected the No House Advantage projections, which are free. So if you're on a budget, that is a free way you can get started with our projections. Now, are there any particular props on No House Advantage and with the sportsbooks today you're targeting?
I was looking at these earlier. I think No House Advantage is a little light on Kamara, particularly in the run game. And this is mainly me just thinking through game script. If New Orleans is up in this game significantly, 62.5 rushing yards for Kamara seems a little light. I went and verified this with your personal projections, and it seemed to be a pretty solid bet here too. So on No House Advantage specifically, I liked Kamara's rushing prop a lot. What did you find?
Nice. Yeah, I kind of I mean, the thing with No House Advantage is they don't have juice on the over or under, so those bets that are heavily juiced, like touchdowns or interceptions, are generally good plays as far as your lineup. One that I like today is Drew Brees over 1.5 touchdowns. Like the thing is, they don't make lines of 2 or like on whole numbers on No House Advantage because it's like there are no pushes. So if you target these ones that are like 0.5, 1.5, etc., you can get a big advantage over people who maybe aren't really as familiar with NFL stats. So as far as props, we have the NFL prop tool. So I'm kind of looking through that right now. Let's see. Yeah, the Kamara over 67.5. I wouldn't be surprised even if they rushed the ball a little bit more today because of their lack of options at receiver. So I like that call.
Yeah, me too. I like Alvin Kamara quite a bit.
Nice. Well, that leads into the next segment, who our favorite Saints are. So, I mean, Michael Thomas continues to be out, and our hypothesis was with Thomas out, Kamara would get peppered with targets constantly throughout the game and average like 30 points a game. It didn't materialize last week, but we got that last minute touchdown reception that kind of put him into the value instead of bust category. Did we learn anything from last game, and how do you expect Kamara to be featured with their lineup today?
Kamara's usage has been so crazy this year. It's not consistent. He's averaging 18.8 opportunities per game, so carries plus targets. But we've seen the targets be sort of volatile. Last game with Brees back, he wasn't targeted as much as I thought he was going to be. And the game prior with Taysom Hill, everyone's worried about his target volume, and he came in with 7 targets, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So this has been a little bit volatile for Kamara, but I do think now without Michael Thomas and without Traquan Smith, we should see him featured a little bit more in the passing game, like he has been earlier in the season with Brees.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, earlier in the season, he was like 9K and still was getting like 50% ownership. So that was just wild. 1 week isn't really a big enough sample. Like the common logic of just like they're so beat up at receiver, so like Kamara should benefit. Like the one chink in the armor there is I feel like sometimes guys project more like running backs to be on the field at the same time as other running backs, and like that doesn't happen that much in NFL. Do you see any possibility that like Kamara and Latavius Murray would be on the field at the same time? Maybe like Kamara running a route out of the slot or something?
They haven't done that a ton. I thought maybe it would happen earlier in the year with Michael Thomas being injured, and then Sanders did miss some time as well, but they didn't really use Kamara a ton out of the slot. They basically brought guys like Marquez Callaway into one-for-one replacement situation. So I don't think there's a ton of upside for that. Maybe a couple snaps here and there, but not something I would be banking on for DFS.
For sure, yeah. So we're relying on him getting a high like target share, which I think is something that we can expect. But it does make me a tiny bit uncomfortable, I guess. But I mean, he's not more expensive than the other guys on the slate. That's the weirdest thing. I mean, like if you project him to average about 25 points per game, with this current lineup, he's averaged 23 on the year for reference. He's only 600. He's like $600 cheaper than Dalvin Cook, and in so much better of a matchup. So, like to me, like Kamara is just like head over heels. Head. I don't know what if that expression makes any sense, but I think he's head and shoulders above the other players today. I feel like I mean, in my final lineups, I have 99% Kamara. So, are you as optimistic about Kamara today?
Yeah, I like Kamara a lot too. And if you mentioned all the great opportunity statistics with Kamara and just like his raw averages, which are amazing, but if you want to talk some matchup stuff too, I mean, not only is Minnesota's defense like bad coming into the game, but they're down a couple of players and linebackers in particular that would be expected to cover him out of the backfield. There's Todd Davis is doubtful. Not that Todd Davis is really like a matchup nightmare at this point in his career, but Eric Kendricks, one of their best defenders, is already out for the game as well. So Minnesota is really thin on defense. So not only are the Saints coming in as heavy favorites in this game, but good matchup for Kamara as well.
Nice. And then the one thing I noticed over the last 2 weeks is Kamara's rushing share has been high compared to the rest of the season. I'm not sure, like he's only rushed 11 times over the past 2 games, while Latavius Murray saw 4 rushing attempts in both of them. Actually, it looks like maybe I have just last week's duplicated, so scratch that. But oh no, it actually was the case. Oh, I gotta check because that's just too weird.
Pretty sure you're right, man. I'm looking at it too.
Okay, so like I thought I had an error in my spreadsheet or something, but I don't think like rushing really scales linearly with the total amount of rushing, and we're expecting big volume today from New Orleans rushing, I would assume, being favorites. Do you think there's something to this 65 to 25 split, or is it just going to change if the Saints run the ball more?
I think, with Kamara in particular, I don't think they're going to give him 20 carries on the ground. They never really have. And Latavius Murray has popped up for some massive touch games this year. If we go back just 4 games, Latavius Murray had 20 opportunities. This is targets combined with carries, but that's still a large ceiling for Latavius Murray in the right game scripts and matchups. And on the year, he's averaging 11.2 opportunities per game. I use opportunities, as a pure volume metric with carries plus targets, but that's pretty decent for an RB2 for a team. So at 7,200, I do think he does carry some upside.
Definitely. Yeah, I think he's a solid play today, especially if you're stacking Saints. So, I mean, if you're stacking them, you're not expecting much production from Minnesota. In that situation, there's going to be garbage time. And I feel like Latavius Murray is likely to run up the number of rushing attempts in the garbage time situation. Although I don't know if they have another back active. I don't know if they've really run anyone else out there. And Ty Montgomery, I guess, is inactive. So I'm just kind of talking through this in my head. Do you think that Murray would get the garbage time work?
I think Murray would get the garbage time work.
Nice. So that's definitely a benefit. Let's talk about the wide receivers. So, as we mentioned, Traquan Smith's out. Deontay Harris, as you mentioned, on the IR. Michael Thomas, IR. Traquan Smith, I mentioned him, IR. So we're left with Emmanuel Sanders as the one guy that's been a key piece this year, active. Then we have Marquez Callaway, Juwon Johnson, who's played a ton over the last couple of weeks, and the little Jordan Humphrey. So as far as pecking order between Will Jordan Humphrey, Marquez Callaway, and Juwon Johnson, what's your read?
This carries a lot of risk, but I do think Marquez Callaway would be the de facto wide receiver two for the team. Of course, just coming off injured reserve, but he's been active and playing ahead of these other players all year long, especially early in the season when we had Emmanuel Sanders and Michael Thomas out for a brief period of time. So I don't know if they'll put Callaway on a pitch count. That would be my main worry with him coming off the injured reserve. Do they limit him just because of the injury? But I think we clearly saw that Callaway maybe had some more raw talent than these players early in the season when he was functioning as a starting wide receiver.
Yeah, and there was a game this year where he ran routes on 95% of the dropbacks in week 7. That was when Sanders and Thomas were out. So he's definitely been used as a top receiver before. The main thing with Callaway today is his price. He's $200 on DraftKings and $5K on FanDuel. That's the minimum on both sites. So really, he doesn't have to be any good to really pop. So like, I mean, in cash, I assume like we got to just put him in there. But what about in GPPs? Do you think he could be popular based on that price?
Yeah, I do think he'll be popular today. He's just kind of that access point if you want to play Dalvin Cook and Kamara. If you're just trying to jam in the studs, he's going to be one of the avenues to do so. And it's also why I think guys like Irv Smith and Conklin that we talked about that are just slightly priced ahead of Callaway won't be as highly owned. In tournaments, I think you could still play Callaway and just find other ways to get different if that's an approach you take. It's not like you're dealing with a ton of salary with Callaway anyway. So there's other approaches I think where you could slot him into your lineup.
Definitely. And one of my favorite approaches with these $200 guys is you just put them in and leave money on the table because people are putting them in as the last man. So if you don't, I mean, Callaway is certainly better than some guys that are several thousand more. So, in my opinion, so I kind of like putting them in and then leaving that extra money on the table, maybe. Now, the other guy that I'm kind of keying in on here is Juwon Johnson. Now, he's been out there a lot over the last 2 weeks. So Juwon Johnson, or last week, sorry, he ran routes on 79% of plays. He also had a week 8 where he ran a good amount of routes. But he hasn't done very much at all. In fact, let's see, pulling up his game log, he's gotten 8 targets for 16 yards. So he's gotten 2.6 fantasy points total over the season. And I'm thinking people aren't going to really click him. What do you make of Juwon Johnson here?
I like him as a contrarian play. There's a lot of concerns with Johnson. I follow these guys obviously closely in college. So he's a kid that came out of Oregon and he wasn't really used in that offense either. Played with Justin Herbert, of course. But I do think if we have full health for Callaway, he'll be running behind him. The Saints use a decent amount of 12 personnel. They don't use a ton, but you will see some sets with Cook and Troutman. I think Juwon Johnson will be the guy coming off the field in those situations with Callaway back. But at the same time, I don't think Juwon Johnson is going to carry any sort of ownership that, Callaway has just because of price. You can get a similar role for Callaway at a fraction of the price, whereas, Juwon Johnson, if he's going to remain on the field even for, say, like 2/3 of the snaps, I think that's something worth targeting in tournaments.
Yeah, I'm always trying to peg those guys that could have a game that haven't yet. I feel like Juwon Johnson fits that bill. I think people are going to be keying in on these wide outs with so many injuries, but I feel like we've kind of honed in on Marquez Callaway as the sharp pick. I feel like your average DFS player is going to hone in on little Jordan Humphrey. That's because little Jordan Humphrey scored a touchdown last week and he got like 10 fantasy points. But I don't feel confident in little Jordan Humphrey's role in the slightest because last week was really the first game all season he's played. I can't remember if that's due to injury or just because he was on the practice squad or whatnot, but he only ran routes on 50% of plays last week. What are you making of a little Jordan Humphrey's role today?
Yeah, he's been a practice squad player for the Saints for 2 years now. He's a kid that came out of Texas. He plays like a slightly different role than some of these other receivers. He's like a big 6'6", big bodied, I guess, red zone threat if you want to call him that. But I think he's just not as dynamic as a player. And then you want to talk opportunity statistics. He did have the 4 targets in the last game, but he only played on about half of the snaps. He only ran a route on 20 dropbacks. So he's clearly behind Juwon Johnson just as far as raw playing time. And now with Marquez Callaway entering the fold, I think there's a legitimate chance he's just the wide receiver 4.
Yeah, I like it, man. I think that this could be a sneaky, or I mean, it could be a good spot to fade Humphreys because like he's kind of the recency bias play, and we're not very confident in his role. So that it does worry me a little bit about him being 6'6" and maybe like being that go-to target in the red zone, but he's not out on the field that much even last week. So we'll have to see what happens with Humphreys. Now the other guys that could see a slight bump would be the tight ends with Jared Cook, Adam Troutman, and Josh Hill. Honestly, like over the past 2 weeks, they haven't really seen a significant change in the number of routes, despite Michael Thomas going out last week. Is there any reason to think that maybe Jared Cook, Hill, and Troutman could see bumps? Or, I mean, Jared Cook could see a bigger target share.
I think Cook might see a bigger target share. I just think it's concerning that he hasn't really seen it. We've had situations similar to this early in the year, so we can at least look back at that small sample for some reference. And Jared Cook's target share didn't increase substantially, at least. So Jared Cook at 8,400, I think it's kind of a tough price to pay outside of just contrarian tournament lineups. And then his role in the offense on the field about 2/3 of snaps, a little bit less than that. That wasn't ideal for Cook either. I think Troutman being their star rookie tight end that they drafted, it looks like he's just playing a little bit more as the season goes along. It hasn't really led to a lot of opportunity for Troutman. He only ran 9 routes last week. But if at the very least, maybe it's just chipping off a little bit of Jared Cook's volume.
Nice. Yeah. Troutman has been playing a decent amount, so about 25% of the dropbacks he's run routes on, so not insignificant. Probably not enough to warrant looks in fantasy, but yeah, that's weird that Jared Cook isn't seeing those snaps. The last guy in chat that someone mentioned is Austin Carr. He's active this week. Now he hasn't really played much this week or this year either. This is Kyle Pheasant, so thanks Kyle for the question. Any read on Austin Carr if he could be playable this week?
I don't think so. He's been clearly behind everyone else we already mentioned, and that's a major problem for me. I think they might be just using Carr on special teams, to be honest with you.
Okay. Yeah, so that's important information. He's never really been like that good in fantasy to begin with. It does seem interesting that they have 5 active wide receivers this week, so maybe it will be a little bit hard to peg if he's going to get the work, but I feel like we kind of have a decent idea with Callaway and Johnson being the number 1 and 2 guys after Sanders, and then Humphreys. Is there anyone else on the Saints that you're kind of looking at today?
I don't think so. I mean, do we have to tell people not to play Taysom Hill?
Oh yeah, let's talk about Taysom Hill. I mean, it does affect Drew Brees a decent amount because, man, like having those quarterback sneaks taken away from your quarterback, like in a full slate, I feel like that hurts a lot. The Showdown, I kind of like the fact that Brees like only gets the passing yards because those are the most correlated with the rest of the team. You can like most easily predict who's going to be in the rest of the lineup if you have Drew Brees, but his overall production is not going to be as good. So Taysom Hill, I mean, he's kind of proved himself as a decent player when he was starting for Brees. Now he's kind of relegated to special situations, so he's not on the field much, but the situations he's in are pretty high leverage. So I don't know if I'm going to have him. That all that being said, do you think you're going to have any shots on Taysom?
Probably not. He's just so expensive for that gadget type role he's going to be playing. So I don't think I'll have Taysom Hill. One more thing about looking at Austin Carr, like Callaway, he'll play some special teams, but like even Traquan Smith played some special teams, and Deontay Harris is mainly a special teamer. So I think that's why he's seen a bump.
Okay. So yeah, just filling those special team snaps that the other guys would be.
Yeah,
So that's
but
good insight.
yeah.
I'm looking through my lineups, man. I actually do have Taysom Hill in 6% of my lineups. I might have to go back and fix that, but let me look at the salary here because he's someone that typically, like if you play him, people are going to call you a fish, but he's 6K on a slate where we don't really need salary because we got guys like Callaway. Am I crazy for having him in 6% of lineups?
6%'s not crazy. I mean, I know how many you're running, so 6% doesn't seem like it's not crazy.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel a little bit better here. So I'm curious in chat what people are thinking of Taysom Hill. It's interesting because he like plays some snaps as the running QB, he plays some snaps at tight end. Like he does it all.
He's like one of the weirdest players in the NFL, man. Him and like Kyle Juszczyk are the two weirdest players.
Yeah, and CJ Ham, RIP, man. So I can't
CJ
play him this
Ham.
week. Showdown favorite.
Speaking of like CJ Ham, you and I talked a little bit about this, but I'm concerned to like what his absence does to Minnesota because they use him a lot and he plays a lot of snaps, and that doesn't like he's not used on the field himself, but CJ Ham's presence takes a wide receiver off the field. So they're in what you'd call, I guess, 22 personnel, like the double running back, sometimes double tight end. Like it's a really weird personnel scheme that they run. So I'm just wondering what you think his absence might do to the Minnesota Vikings, because I really am not sure.
Man, this is really not my area of expertise. The
Mine
fullback
either.
depth. So yeah, it's kind of interesting because that means they take a wide receiver or another player off the field to put them on. So that is interesting for maybe like a Chad Beebe, or I mean, you mentioned before the show to me that they called up a backup fullback. I did notice last year when, man, who's that fullback for the Patriots? That Devlin, he was out, and then Jacob Johnson kind of got called up and played a lot of snaps. So maybe it is a position where they just have that backup ready in the wings.
They're one of
But
the rare teams that uses an old school fullback, so I wouldn't be surprised.
yeah, the fullbacks aren't very hard to come by, probably, as far as the fullback prospects getting them signed and stuff.
And CJ Ham's elite in that regard.
Definitely, CJ Ham, dare I say, is Ham. So yeah, that was horrible. All right, guys. So if I could get a thumbs up for that one, appreciate it. We do have a giveaway going on today for football. If you hit up our Awesemo NFL handle on Twitter, if you guys can follow that, appreciate it. We have a promo going. So will Cook or Kamara have more total yards? That actually is kind of a good question. So between Cook and Kamara, just the yardage alone, I mean, Cook's got the bigger role. Kamara's got the better matchup. Which way would you lean?
That one's really tough. I think I would still side with Cook just on straight volume.
Yeah, I agree. So go to Awesemo_com on Twitter to participate in that. We're giving away a free $250 NFL annual subscription. So also hit us up on Instagram, Awesemo_com. So now that we've talked about all the players, let's talk about maybe how we put them together. So if we're building a single entry or 3 max lineup for one of these big DraftKings tournaments, one of the things I like to do is kind of figure out what game script I want to target first, and then figure out who fits in that game script. So let's start off with the captain position. Who would be some captains you're looking at today?
Yeah, so if we want to just go with projected game script and seeing the Saints are touchdown favorites, I do think that favors Kamara. He's going to come with extreme ownership because of that. So if you're playing something, just like massive and you want some leverage, like Latavius Murray would give you some leverage, not just from a raw ownership perspective, but when Latavius Murray hits his ceiling, I think it's likelier that Alvin Kamara doesn't hit his. So we're talking a lot of leverage here. This is something I would only do in like the largest of fields, but it's something to consider. Alvin Kamara is going to be a fantastic play considering the game script too.
Definitely. And if you have Latavius Murray and a captain, you're saving a lot of money over other guys. So you can get in a combo you couldn't have with Kamara captain. Now, if we have Latavius Murray, we're expecting a New Orleans domination on the ground, most likely. So I'd kind of lean towards defense, maybe kicker. Like Kamara himself is an interesting option because Latavius Murray kind of gets whatever's left after Kamara's 20 touches. So would you put Kamara in this lineup with Latavius a captain?
That's a really interesting construction, considering Kamara is coming with high ownership. But how many of the lineups that have Kamara would you think also have Latavius Murray? Because I think a lot of people might be gun shy about that construction.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess we have Kamara at 50% in the utility spot. Uh, I don't know how people would read that. Like, if you have Murray, do you not want Kamara? Because I kind of like feel the opposite way. But
Same.
I do feel like most people aren't going to play two running backs for one team.
Yeah, I agree
Um,
with you.
Nice. So I think Kamara in the flex, maybe a kicker, defense, and then we got to pick at least one player from the Minnesota Vikings to play in this lineup. Who would you be gunning for if you're doing a one-off from the Vikings?
Well, in this situation that we've laid out here, where we're playing Latavius, Kamara, a kicker, and a defense, we still have a ton of salary left. So I don't think we're working with a ton of salary restrictions. Given the potential game script, I don't hate even put Dalvin Cook in that because he's such a value in this passing game for Minnesota. But if we really want to go full Saints sort of onslaught, they should be throwing the ball more to Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. With the salary we have available, we should have no problem getting either of them. And we talked about Orleans earlier. I would try to get Jefferson.
Nice. Yeah, Jefferson, he can really do a good individual performance without um, Kirk Cousins really going off. So I think he'd be a good run back. I do like Cousins a little bit. The one quarterback run back to your stack is something I think is valuable because say they get like 250 yards and no TDs, like it's 10 points. It can be good enough for a the best performance on a bad team performance. You got some good options there. So it's second lineup. We did a New Orleans rushing onslaught. What would be another game script you might target?
So just taking like a contrarian game script, like say maybe we don't even go like Minnesota onslaught or something. Maybe we don't think Minnesota gets up in the game, but say it's like competitive and it's a back and forth affair with a lot of points. I think you can still gain some leverage by playing a Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen in the captain spot. Excuse me. Both of them, they're not in the top three most owned captains. Thielen in particular, he's the sixth most owned captain right now. So playing him, you're saving a little bit of salary off of the Camaras and Cooks of the world, but you're still getting someone in a condensed target share. And if that is, a competitive game script, I don't even think it needs to be severely negative. Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson could have big enough days to pay off that salary in the captain slot.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, those are some really high upside guys. So now, if we have Jefferson or Thielen in captain spot, we have to either rely on high efficiency or high volume. That volume would have to come with the New Orleans Saints putting up a decent performance as well. So would you be leaning more towards a more balanced build between the Vikings and Saints if you're starting off with the wide out from Minnesota captain?
Yes, I think that's just the proper strategy I would take.
Awesome. So I think, I mean, one guy that I'm pretty much plugging in every lineup is Kamara. So like, pretty much game script proof receiving and running. Um, but aside from that, so now we have Jefferson and captain or Thielen. Now I assume like Cousins would have to be high on the list of guys we want to put in this.
For sure. Cousins would be the next man in for me.
So I know some guys out there don't. They'll think like maybe you don't want to stack because you're more contrarian, but it does work sometimes if you get that injury. Like man, that Carr one was brutal where he got injured at the very start of the game, and then Mariota was in the winning lineup, but I don't usually play for that.
That was crazy.
Yeah. It happens once a year. Last year happened with the Chiefs, where Matt Moore is a backup QB was in the winning lineup. But happened too recently. I guess people are gonna chase that. Now, we got Jefferson, we got Thielen and Cousins. We're gonna need some value plays. Maybe a Marquez Callaway.
Yeah. I think he's got to be the preferred one.
Awesome. So I think we got a good start to the lineup there. My my game script on my top showdown plays page. I kind of run these sims to figure out the chance that each player will be the highest scoring. There's a huge disparity with Alvin Kamara today. 20% owned in the captain, 50% owned, or sorry, 50% chance of being the highest scorer. I just have a lot of faith in like the PPR points, the rushing and receiving to combine to a big overall performance. And if the Saints have a big day, he's probably pretty likely to be the highest scorer. Now, maybe this 20% could be a little bit low. Like given how much that I'm thinking that he's probably the top overall player of the day. Now, what do you think of Kamara? I mean, like, would he be your top option and captain?
Yeah, he is. I love Kamara today for all the reasons you mentioned too. He's not game script dependent. You can use him in every single sort of game script that you would build out in your head. So even if you think that Minnesota gets up in this game in a super contrarian approach, Kamara is still heavily involved. Then you take away Michael Thomas and you take away Traquan Smith. I think there's a decent chance that Kamara sees an elevated target volume.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, he's the number one player getting the receiving plays. So I think, man, I'm not saying this well, but he, as far as running backs, it's unusual for them to be the number one option as a receiver, but this could be a rare exception. Would that make you want to put Drew Brees in at the utility spot?
I think you can play Drew Brees at the utility slot just fine. In the lineup we built with Justin Jefferson as the captain and Kamara in the utility spot, we still have enough salary left to play Cousins and Drew Brees as long as we slot in Callaway. And I don't feel really bad about that at all.
Definitely. I mean, if you can get two quarterbacks and two receivers, like that's pretty solid. Especially with Kamara in there.
Yeah.
And then Callaway, $200. Harder to not pick him. What about? I mean, if we have Kamara, we have the chalkiest guy in at captain. Who would be one contrarian guy that maybe we could look to mix it up?
If we have a Kamara captain, you said?
Yeah.
I would look at maybe one of the tight ends. I don't think Jared Cook is going to carry a lot of ownership today. Same thing with Irv Smith. They're kind of in a weird price tier. I think people are more likely going to take this stars and scrubs type approach to lineups, leaving guys like Jared Cook and Irv Smith, who still have significant roles in their offense, a little bit overlooked. So those are two players I would consider.
Nice. Yeah, like that. Irv Smith seems like maybe a guy that would go under the radar. So let's talk about some final thoughts. First of all, like we talked a lot about the captains. Now, Kamara, like I'm having a really hard time building lineups where he's not at the captain. But do you think maybe? Okay, so one of my favorite things is defense captain because I feel like in a really low scoring game, like they can go off, but I feel like people actually play defense at captain, so it hasn't worked out as well as I hope. Any love for defense at captain?
I like it a little bit. Again, defense isn't something I particularly tried to force in there. I know a lot of people were playing Pittsburgh's defense at captain against Cincinnati, and man, I feel like when you have those sort of setups with it, as variant as defense is, relying on a lot of touchdowns and turnovers, when people expect it to be, a consideration at captain, I'm less likely to do so. So tonight, it's not something I've really heard many people talk about. The Saints, the matchup suits them very well. They have good pass rush against Minnesota, who's projected to be throwing the ball more, but in a super contrarian game script as well. Minnesota's horrible defense, like Cincinnati's defense, just played reasonably well against Pittsburgh. It's not out of the realm of possibility for Minnesota's defense to have a productive game.
Definitely, yeah, man. Like if Minnesota's defense has a big day, like they could be like really a key to winning. But one thing we didn't really mention is the Minnesota stack. Do you feel like that could go under the radar? Kind of like Monday's game where no one was on Cincinnati and like the Millie Maker winner didn't even have like the perfect lineup.
Yeah, I think it could be. Like you mentioned, I think most people are going to be trying to play Kamara, and then Callaway, I think, will be heavily owned as well. So that's two Saints right there. And if you just fill it out maybe with, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a 5-1 or a 4-2 on the Saints side. I think people will at least be trying to go with like a 3-3. So if you end up with a 4-2 or a 5-1 in Minnesota's favor, I think that'll naturally be pretty contrarian.
Nice. I like it. It's hard to like call those, but man, New Orleans last week. I want to mention this a second. The first half, they were just like absolutely terrible. I think Drew Brees had like 40 first half passing yards. So like, what
It's
the
rough.
hell happened there? Like that was so unusual. Did you see the game?
Yeah, I was playing against Drew Brees. I play one high stakes seasonal league, and of course, I'm playing against Drew Brees in that league. So I think I'm printing my money ahead of time in that first half, and then he comes back and he has a reasonable game. So I was watching, not pleasantly.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's these guys on the Saints just aren't quite as good as they had been, and at least with Breeze, he's only averaged about 7.3 yards per attempt. Running, they've averaged 4.4, so this is really not that much better than an average offense, in my opinion. Minnesota's defense, though, as you mentioned, a little beat up, but I feel like maybe New Orleans, maybe a little bit overrated. Actually, I'm kind of regretting. I guess there's 5 minutes left, so I'm thinking about putting in a bet on the Minnesota +7. Have you been betting sides at all, and what would you make of that particular one?
Yeah, I bet the Saints earlier in the week. So I do have the Saints right now.
Okay, so what are you seeing that kind of leans you to betting Saints?
So it's one, Michael Thomas has been out for the entire season, essentially. I mean, he's played a little bit. So people might argue Michael Thomas's absence is a big detriment to this team. Well, it's not something they've really been dealing with that's new. I mean, he's been out the entire year and they've been a very productive team. Minnesota has significant absences on their defense, including some of their best players. The Saints still have Drew Brees, they still have Kamara, so I think that's a significant edge for them specifically, which is why I ended up taking it earlier in the week.
Nice. Yeah, I think this one could be interesting. I do like the Minnesota side because, as I mentioned, I feel like Minnesota's offense might even be like a better offense than the Saints, but then the defense for the Saints is way better than Minnesota's defense. So it's a little hard to play these. So I'd be interested to hear what everyone in chat is betting today. Um, we got 5 minutes left, so I'll look out for some questions here. Chad is calling us out for not answering the questions. My bad. He's asking Murray or Smith for flex on DK Cash.
I think probably Murray still don't feel great about it, but I think we could see some elevated opportunities for Murray today. We haven't really seen Irv Smith's role grow with the absence of Kyle Rudolph, but the game script that we're laying out and that bookmakers have laid out also does favor Irv Smith receiving more targets. That one's close, but I would tentatively go Murray.
Yeah, I think Murray's in a better spot. To me, this one is more of a line of construction question than a talent evaluation because if you have Kirk Cousins, then Irv Smith could be a nice correlation. If you have a lot of Saints and not many Vikings, then that's going to bump up Murray. So I'm looking for who's in the lineup. But overall, I agree. Murray is probably a better play today. We do have a question about FanDuel. What are you looking at on FanDuel on this slate? They have some big tournaments, 200K to first. It looks like overlay a little bit. So, who are your favorite plays on FanDuel?
Man, I still think Kamara's a good play. Like, I just can't get away from him. Do you think Kamara is a solid play on FanDuel as well?
Yeah, I mean, he's still my top play on FanDuel. Almost as high a chance of being the top scorer despite the PPR being worth half as much. But like the PPR like hurts wide receivers more. So the quarterbacks tend to have a higher chance of being the best MVP. But Drew Brees with 0 rushing, that kind of like knocks him down a lot in my opinion. So would this be a rare slate where maybe quarterback is not a great MVP choice?
Yeah, I think it'll be outside of like Kamara and Cook. If you play like anyone else, I think it'll be contrarian too.
That's true because they don't multiply the salaries on FanDuel. So I'm browsing through my lineups, just like all Kamara, all Cook, pretty much. Like, maybe a couple other lineups, but the one thing I do like about having the quarterback in MVP is like it helps you like determine the rest of your lineup. So like I'm looking at this one, I have Breeze and then Kamara and 2 pass catchers from the Saints. So like just like you kind of know what the line's going to look like if that smashes.
Yeah, for sure. I like that.
Machiavelli says everyone on Conklin today mean Irv Smith on optimal. Is Conklin is he going to be popular? Like, could you see people like maybe picking him?
My first instinct is no, just because I would think people go down to Callaway and then up to the studs rather than play this sort of mid-tier build. But am I wrong on that?
No, I mean, like to me, it's just like a contrarian pick. Like I'm kind of like pulling up the game log now because I'm like, okay, let's see what people are talking about. Because last week, 4 targets, 57 yards, 1 TD, 14 fantasy points. So he's kind of like the recency bias pick. Uh, maybe maybe people like end up clicking him a little bit more than some other guys around 3K. But like it does, maybe that would be a reason not to play him, I guess, more than anything. What do you think?
Yeah, I honestly didn't know that game log, but makes sense now.
Yeah, I think I'd rather go to some guys that haven't produced, like Juwon Johnson and Callaway, who's coming off the IR. Chad said, Merry Christmas to all you guys. Appreciate it. Merry Christmas to everyone in the chat here. Got 1 minute left to make some final choices here. So who would be most likely to be your last man in? Would it be Callaway?
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah, $200. I mean, like that's just insane. Saints defense or Murray? What do you think of that?
I like what you said in tournaments about playing to the under. So the Saints defense I would assume, is going to be lower owned. If you're playing to the under, I think the Saints defense could be a nice contrarian play.
Nice. I'd say why not both? I mean, I know that's not what they're asking, but like those two match up pretty well. So
Kirk Cousins takes a lot of sacks.
that's definitely a big factor for the Saints here. All right, guys. So we're locking now. Merry Christmas to everybody. Hope everyone has a great time today. No, it's a tougher year where not everyone's seen their families. My parents told me like you can call them in June or something. So I'm sure a lot of people out there stay in the same spot, but yeah, appreciate everyone's support of the YouTube channel, the website, and I hope everyone is has some good sweats today. Hopefully we can get some takedowns, and Merry Christmas. All right, I guess I should, since I'm the producer, I guess I should have queued it up to end here. All right, guys, so we'll catch you back here tomorrow. We got some great NFL and NBA action, so until next time.